Having us. We're grateful to be here at the Rhode Island League of Cities. My name is Nicole Figueredo. I'm the CEO of Capital Strategic Solutions. For anyone who hasn't heard of us or received an email from us, we are a municipal consulting firm. We have retired personnel on our team, from town administrators, managers, chief financial officers, as well as public works directors in a plethora of other areas. And we assist municipalities with a number of different projects, whether it's interim services, coaching at the executive level, helping you with an emerging contaminant situation, or public outreach and engagement. But I'm excited here today because joining us is Jennifer Thompson, our Chief Development Officer, as well as Bill Keegan, our Senior Project Manager, who is going to talk to you about communication techniques to help you maximize your team's performance. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Bill, and let me know when you want me to start the presentation.
Thank you very much, Nicole, and Jen, thanks for hosting us this morning. Just a shout out to Jen Thompson, who is joining us here as well this morning. We're all key members of the team that work at Capital Strategic Solutions who've done a great job of expanding the ability for cities and towns to do their role, to do their work in a much more functional and much more productive way. Capital Strategic Solutions is actually in multiple states around New England, all the way into Florida and Mexico. So we are not only just a local Massachusetts firm, but we're a national firm at this point too. So we do a lot of work around the country, and so we've taken some of the best practices around the country to share with cities and towns so we can help you do your jobs better. So I'm here to talk to you this morning about how you can communicate better with your team and help try and maximize their performance. These are time-proven practices that I have learned over the years, as well as practiced them myself in many ways. And I've worked in multiple organizations around Massachusetts for the most part, but also in Florida. I was able to utilize the same approach and had a fair amount of success in getting the team to produce and make my job easier as a manager, as opposed to being the person that's always making the decisions without or just based upon my own input. But more importantly, we're able to transform it into making a more of a team approach in which everybody felt valued and was able to really help me do my job easier, which I hope will be the outcome for you as well. So with that, we can start, Nicole, if you would, please. So the title of this morning's presentation is Communication Techniques to Help Maximize Your Team's Performance. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a former town manager from Massachusetts, but I've worked in Florida and have worked in Rhode Island as well. I've worked in Pawtucket, on most recently as an interim HR director for the city of Pawtucket. So I've worked in multiple states as well, and I've tried to utilize the same approach that I'm going to talk about this morning with folks in all the organizations that I worked in. I am an ICMA credentialed manager as well as a lifetime member. So that's why the letters ICMA, CM, and LM are after my name. So an ICMA credentialed manager, for anybody who would like to know, is actually there's like 1,300 of us managers in the world who have dedicated their life to a lifelong learning, and so we're constantly working on new ideas and new approaches to work with cities and towns around the country, around the world, actually. So next slide, please. So the outline of today's presentation is going to talk about 7 or 8 different ideas and thoughts about how we can actually work on communication in your organization. And first of all, communication. Why is communication such an important element to achieving success with your team? The next topic is to talk to team members. Talking to team members is a lost art in today's fast-paced world. And how are successful teams formed? As the leader of your organization, what is your role? I mean, what key elements do you play as a leader of your organization? And it doesn't matter if you're the chief executive, or if you're a finance director, or if you're a supervisor. It doesn't matter. You still play an important role in how you can actually get your team to communicate better. Next slide, please. Some of the successful communication methods that we will cover with your team will be discussed in the next topic. And then how do you right the ship if your team strays off course? Because that happens, and it happens quite often, particularly in the municipal world, because we are such a fast-paced type of business that we do, that things can get off course pretty quickly if we're not careful. So it's going to be, again, an important role for you as the director, or as the leader of your organization, to help keep your ship on course. And then good communication practices are addictive for any organization. And I'll share with you some of the stories and ideas and concepts that we've done to not only teach the managers and the top department heads in your organization, but also the levels below those organizations, to how they can actually improve their communication practices and skills as well. So with that, we'll start with the first topic. Why is communication such an important element of achieving success with your team? Well, in today's world of memes and Zooms and texts, which is really the norm for most people, we get so caught up in this idea and notion that this is the right way to communicate with team members, and that it's just primarily because it's more of a quick way of addressing things in terms of time management, which is for years, this has been, for many years, it's become the way to do things just to save time for the manager. But quite honestly, it's not the best way to actually communicate with your team. Concept of exchanging ideas while forging working relationships with other members of the team management team becomes foreign and less comfortable. So you have members of your team that have really not got to know each other all that well. So when they go to try and share ideas and concepts, they may feel a little bit less comfortable doing that and having that honest conversation when in a room where they're not really that comfortable with the other folks that are around them. Trust and respect are very, very important while exchanging alternative ideas, and concepts get lost, and problem solving becomes more elusive in an environment where you have less personal contact with your fellow team members. I try to emphasize that in any organization I've been in. I'll share with you some stories later on this morning about what I've seen when I walked into an organization for the first time, and how, especially in organizations where the management role was actually the changeover did not go so well, where the manager was more or less extricated from the organization, and the department heads felt as though they had been abandoned by the governing boards, etc., and felt that their work was being minimized in the organization. In that situation, it's really critical for the manager, the chief executive, to sit down with everybody and say, look, we're all sort of part of the same team. This is something that we have to work through together and develop that working relationship and to build that trust. So we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Next slide, please. So physically talking to team members has become a lost art in today's fast-paced world. At one point in my career, management by walking around was considered to be the thing, the so-called Deming approach, where everybody was able to connect with people on that level. But there was some value to that approach. There's no question. It was important to see people at work at their own stations and to get to sort of walk in their shoes a little bit. And there's still value to that. However, it's really not that practical in a world in which, particularly in the world of municipal world, where the folks are located in different buildings and different campuses and throughout the entire community. So as a result, getting around to all those different areas is not the most efficient way of doing that. And as such, a lot of folks, they may try that initially, but then walk away from that because it's really not, it takes up too much time to do that. Time management seems to be the most common management practice that so-called experts talk about today. Unfortunately, most of these approaches actually minimize the valuable time that is needed to speak with and get to know team members on your group. Because It's more or less it's become the point of, well, let's get in, let's get the quick hit, get in, talk about an issue, and then walk away from it, and then hope that everybody sort of got the idea and the notion as to what was important. That's a critical piece of making sure that everybody on your team is still rowing in the same direction. That's not always the case when you do things based on a time management approach. So what if there was a way that practices both a proven time management tool while also allowing you to connect with your team members each week? And we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. Next slide, please. So how are successful teams formed? Well, first of all, a successful team is formed through the development of working relationships. I've yet to see any team that was formed that was effective without the relationships being formed with the fellow team members at the table. More often than not, you see situations where folks call themselves team members, but they don't actually really know those folks. And they sit in a room together and they talk about ideas, but the ideas just go in one ear and out the other, and they don't really understand the real impact that those ideas have on their individual operations, and how the collective idea of getting everybody rowing in the same direction can actually get a lot more done. So I think that's it's a big mistake that a lot of organizations make, is just to put people in the room and call them a team. True teams are formed, however, when each member in the room understands the mission of the organization, and then each member executes their role in a manner that helps everyone achieve the mission. So classic example of cities and towns is that the goal of most organizations is to serve the public and to provide the best services that residents have come to know and expect. That means that police departments, fire departments, public works, the tax collector, the town clerk, all those folks have to do their jobs well in order to meet that ultimate mission and goal. And more often than not, there's not a true appreciation for the kind of trials and tribulations that those operations have individually that can actually be helped by the fellow members of the team and helping them all collectively do their job better. One thing that I learned as a manager for several years was that I found that my job was much more difficult if I didn't have those working relationships with my team members. I found that I was almost alone in that mission more often than not if I didn't establish that working relationship with the folks that worked for me. So I really truly encourage that development is to work with that and understand folks and what they do and what's important to them. Respect has to occur with regard to the significance of each member's role in the organization. Any kind of jealousy or minimizing other members' roles will only work against the effort of the mission of ultimately achieving the mission of the community. So we can't, while I know that it's difficult because every personality is different. I get that completely. And in working and trying to develop your team, there are some folks that have been there for many, many years. There are some people that have been there for actually a short few months, and everybody's going to have a different approach to how we address that. The thing that's important for you, though, as the manager, is to make sure that everybody connects on the same level. And how you do that is by putting them in the room and having a conversation with them and developing that relationship. This can only occur if there's a solid working relationship which has been formed amongst the team members themselves. And when I say that, I've walked into organizations on several occasions where I found that everybody in the room sort of looked at each other when you brought everybody together in the room, and they said, "Okay, what do we do now?" I've gone to meetings, and I'll talk about this in a minute further, but I walked into meetings where the room was silent when I walked into the room. And that's never a good sign when that happens. That means that nobody's really talking and developing that relationship before the meeting and then after the meeting, which I find that the meetings before the meeting and the meeting after the meeting are the most critical pieces of that forming that relationship. Next slide. Next slide, please. So as the leader of your organization, what is your role in forming the team? Well, first of all, you set the number of members on the bus, so to speak, and the seats in which they sit in. So if you bring everybody together, and part of this, by the way, is something that we like to do as what Capital Strategic Solutions can do, is that we go into organizations and we do organizational audits, and we actually take a look at how organizations are formed. And we see that in many cases, there are 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 people all reporting to the town manager or town administrator. Well, that's just not a workable type of structure in many ways, because all you're doing now is you're creating a situation where the manager is constantly chasing his tail or his or her tail as to how we're going to get things done and putting out fires all day long. there's very little strategic discussions that go on in those kind of environments. So what we like to do is to take a look at the organization and then try and minimize the number of department heads and reformulate the organization in a way that makes the most sense and becomes more strategically functional. So you set the rules of engagement. Even if you have a so-called decentralized organization, you still can set the rules of engagement. That means that you set the tone for the meeting by saying this is how we're going to communicate with each other, and that we're not going to be critical. We're going to be more supportive in our approach, and we're going to be looking towards solving issues, not creating them as for each day that we have those kind of discussions. You set the agenda for the meeting each week. And by the way, my recommendation to all of you is that you meet once weekly, and we'll talk about the meeting makeup in a minute. But you meet once weekly together for a short period of time, not a long period of time, but I'm talking less than an hour or less rather. And as a result, during that period of time, you end up working through a lot of important issues that are important to the community, not to the individual departments themselves, even though that can be a byproduct of how that works in each individual city, each individual department. You hold everyone accountable, including yourself, for being prepared for each meeting. So you go to the meeting, you know how important that is and what the issues are, and that you're prepared for a discussion about giving a total briefing about what's going on in your department and how then the challenges that you're facing, that they're facing in each one of the areas that they work in. You review the takeaways from each meeting, and then you make sure that there is follow-up that has to be executed following the meeting. So we make sure that whatever gets brought out and some of the solutions that come out of that meeting are actually put into work, and then we're able to execute them in the weeks to come, in the weeks and days to come. Next slide, please. So some of the successful communication methods with your team are meet as a team once a week at a set time and place. I used to meet with my team on Wednesday mornings at 9:30, and we were done by 10:30. And we did get to a point where we didn't always have to meet in person, because we had already established the relationships in a way that made sense. Sometimes we were able to do them through Zoom. So we would have, it'd be like the Brady Bunch, where everybody be around the screen, and then we would all talk together. And then, but you as the manager would lead that discussion and say, okay, what's happening in public works, what's happening in fire, what's happening in police. But you would set the tone for the meeting initially by saying, okay, this is what the Board of Selectmen or City Council or whatever the council was asking of me to do that week, and making sure that if anybody had a piece of that they were taking responsibility for that and making sure that was getting done. The meeting should not last more than 60 minutes. I mean, there are times when that's going to go longer than that. That's usually when there's a specific issue that's going to require a little more time. And sometimes it may require a follow-up meeting with certain members of the team just to get a certain topic done because of the nature and the difficulty of the issue. Every person needs to participate in a way that helps solve the challenge of the week. And, I can't tell you, there were times that were so frustrating for me at times where I go to a meeting and certain people would say, okay, what's happening in your department? They would say, everything's good, no problems, I got no issues this week. And you'd hear that time after time after time. Well, I'd hear that about 3 times, and then I call the person aside after the meeting and say, look, I'm paying you to be the department head of your operation. You can't just tell me everything's just fine, because I just know that's not the case. So tell me what's going on in your operation and how are you being challenged? So that's how you hold people accountable for those kind of discussions, and how you're able to get people to realize that they're a valued member of the team, and even there's piece, even if it's a smaller piece of the organization's responsibility, it still is an integral part of what the overall service is being provided to your community. The next slide, please. So the respect in meetings is critical. If that breaks down, it's your job as the manager to get the meetings refocused. Sometimes people get frustrated, and sometimes they speak overtly, and it gets to the point where we say, okay, hold on, let's refocus. What's our mission here? Remember what the mission is here. It's not about getting into a tangle with another department head or an issue. And sometimes those issues can be difficult. There's no question about that. If that requires an additional follow-up between individuals, it's up to you to have that meeting with them and making sure that those folks are able to work out their concerns and help forge that relationship to a stronger relationship. Conversation before the meetings and after the meetings, I talked about this earlier, is really a good indicator that the relationship is starting to form. Now, I touched upon this a bit earlier, but I remember starting a meeting in one of the last communities I served as a town manager, and the previous manager was actually removed unceremoniously. Excuse me, he was removed unceremoniously and was able to, and it was not a good relationship, and unfortunately the person left on very bad terms. But it really had an impact upon the team itself. And as a result, I knew that was going to be the case when I walked in. But I insisted on having those meetings once a week because I wanted to see how the relationship of the team could actually form given the difficult circumstance that it was. So when I first went to those meetings, I found that the team was very dysfunctional. Nobody was talking. There was actually arguments and little battles going on between certain department heads, and we could tell, you could feel the friction in the room at times. And so I continued to have the meetings for several weeks, and little by little, I noticed that there was more conversation going on before the meeting, and then after the meeting, I could see that the relationships were actually starting to forge. And I purposely would go to those meetings a little bit late, because I wanted to see how much that relationship could actually form on their own. I didn't want to force the relationship. I wanted them to actually do it on their own. So we were able to find that. I found that actually did happen. And over time, it got to the point where I'd say a couple of months later, I would get to the meeting and they were talking so much, I had to say, hey, wait a minute, we still have some business to take care of here. So we had to actually stop that and say, let's get back into what we need to talk about, and then you can get back to what you want to do afterwards. And lo and behold, after we finished the meeting, they got back into having conversations amongst themselves again. And little by little, I found that each one of those departments were actually helping themselves getting their jobs done. And so that became a lot more functional for the departments, and they became very supportive of each other under that relationship. So try to get everyone to come to open up and about some of the challenges they are facing that week, and invite input from others to help. I mean, I think what's critically important in having these conversations with your team members is to make sure they don't feel alone. I mean, the job is hard enough as it is, and we all know how difficult it is to manage in this environment, in today's environment. I can personally say that I've been doing this for 42 years now, that I can tell you that and when I first started out in the business, it was not nearly as difficult as it is now. And so it's really critically important that folks that work on a municipal team together know that they have the support of their fellow department heads to get their jobs done. It's so critically important so that you as the manager can actually get your job done easier, knowing that your team supports each other. It's critically important that they were able to establish that. Next slide, please. So how do you right the ship if your team strays off course? Well, having a clear mission statement from the beginning helps the team to maintain focus. I mean, I don't know how many communities in Rhode Island have mission statements, But if you don't have one, I strongly encourage you to do one and to get one. And if anybody has an interest in helping someone to guide them through that process, that's something we can do for you. But you can certainly, there are other examples of committees that have done that. But quite honestly, it's the kind of thing that if you don't know why you're doing this, it's going to be much more difficult for you to stay focused and to stay on track as to what needs to get done on a day-to-day basis. So it's really critically important that you have a mission statement for your community and make sure that you all are continuing rowing in the same direction. Spend some time each week bringing everyone's attention back to the focus of that mission in those department head meetings. And I used to call them operations team meetings as opposed to department head meetings, so to speak, because by doing it that way, by going back to the mission statement, we all stay focused on what's really critically important to the community itself. And not, even though sometimes you're in your own world as a department head, focusing on what's important to you, the end result is really critical to the entire community as a whole. So next slide, please. So again, by riding the ship in the public sector, it's easy to get distracted by the crisis of the day, and that happens because when things just don't happen in a linear fashion in the public world. Things can happen on virtually any time, any moment, given the significance of a weather-related event or a community-related event, or a debate between or an argument between individuals and that disagree on particular topics in the community. So it's obviously those are things that you need to participate in, but don't just think that you can do those on your own. Seek the help of your department heads in those discussions. Have them weigh in those conversations, and don't keep them to yourself. Use those department head meetings, those operations team meetings, as sounding boards for the issues that you're dealing with as a manager. So you can actually get some ideas that you haven't thought of, because you may be the new person in the role, and some of those people have been around the table for a long time, and they actually know the community better than you do. So utilize those team members to your advantage to make sure that you clearly understand the sort of trapdoors, if you will, that can happen in a community if you're not paying attention to what's some of the things that have been happening over the years. So I really do think that the crisis of the day is important, but what's important about the meetings that you have on a weekly basis is try not to let the crisis of the day derail you from what the critical issues are that's on your agenda for the week. You can take time after some of those meetings or before some of those meetings to get further input. It's also important, as I said, that certain members of the team can solve that issue and actually pull some people aside afterwards to say, hey, look, how can we work this out? Well, how can you help fire and police in this issue? Perhaps a public works department could actually help with fire and police in addressing some of road closure issues, things of that nature. How do we get that figured out so that we continue to maintain public safety for the community? So again, it's an opportunity to get everybody in the room and solve things rapidly, as opposed to trying to track people down throughout the day with all of our busy schedules as to how we can get people and connect with people on different levels. Next slide, please. So it's important as the manager is to lead with compassion, passion, compassion, and conviction. So energize your team by showing genuine enthusiasm for your mission and goals. And the goals that I used to have were set primarily by the elected officials. And then what I would do is take those same goals and have the team weigh in on those goals, and they would help me solve those issues for the elected officials. So it's important to, again, use your team in that way, and you could do that on a weekly basis, having that conversation. Say, here's where we are with this set of strategic goals, if you will, for the city or town, and go through them on a checklist and say, look, here we are. What's the status of this? What's the status of that? And roll through those things fairly easily. Now, if you have a much larger community, your meeting may take a little bit longer because of that, but that's okay, as long as you're maintaining that connection with your department heads and making sure that you're staying focused on the mission and the goals of the community. Make thoughtful, value-driven decisions and stand by them with confidence. Don't be wishy-washy about making decisions if in fact you think your team supports you, because they may be the only people that support you in a difficult, challenging situation, especially a political one. So if your team feels very strongly about an issue, understand the politics of the situation, but also understand the facts and understand the ground that you're standing on. So that if you're firm in the convictions that you have, then you should stand by that and also support your team in making sure those decisions get done. Understand your team's needs. Listen actively and foster a supportive environment. So if you're listening through a meeting and you're at a meeting where you see some of your departments are not being as responsive as they usually are, pick up on that and then have a phone call afterwards and talk to those folks and say, look, I noticed that you weren't as active today. Is everything okay? Make sure that, sometimes things happen at home. Sometimes things happen outside the realm of the work that they're doing that could actually impact their ability to perform their job as they usually do. It's important for you to know that. It's also important for you to try and support them in any way you can. And your actions set the tone. Lead by example. But make sure you show empathy and clarity and provide accountability. So, if you're asking your people to do something, make sure that you're doing it yourself. Don't be setting different standards for yourself and having a different set of standards for your own people. Make sure you're all on the same level and doing that work collectively. And the last one, next one. So good communication practices are addictive for an organization. So I found this, I can't tell you how many times I found this to be true. Said once you start practicing the communication skills with your management team, they should be something that they should be duplicating within their own department levels. I'm actually working on this project on this type of approach with a community right now up in New Hampshire, where they've done an unbelievable job of communicating with each other and actually helping each other connect on a regular level. They talk on a weekly basis now. They actually supported each other during the capital expenditure process this year in a way that had never been done, and anybody can remember, and to the point where they actually were able to get a new public safety building out of that because a bunch of other departments realized how important that was to the overall community's goals. So they were able to support that, and some of them were able to take a step back because they realized how important that was. So having that understanding it was a direct result of having that conversation with the department heads directly, and then they were able to communicate that same important value to the people that were below them in each department, so they understood why that was done, and there was less conflict because of that. So the more you communicate, you'll see that there was less conflict in the organization because of that. The other thing too is that make sure that if you're having your own department head level, department head meetings or actually department meetings with supervisors, that you're practicing the same type of approach. Show empathy, listen actively, and make sure that whatever goals that you have for your organization are being shared with them, so they understand what kind of pressures you're under to get something done and how they can help. When you ask somebody to help you, you're already 50% solved towards the problem. Having somebody help you get something done means it takes pressure off of you, but also makes them feel valued because you took the time to ask them what their thoughts were. And as part of an annual performance review, make sure you ask your managers how they are communicating with their own team members. Don't dismiss that. It's I used to cringe sometimes because when certain people would talk about communication, because communication can be defined in multiple ways. But the reality is that the end result is that how well are you getting your work done? Because the better you communicate, the more work you're actually getting done and getting completed. Encourage them to practice what you're learning at each week's meeting, so that they stay focused and they stay educated on the important issues in your departments, and that they understand the whole mission that we're talking about at the department head level. Now, you wouldn't necessarily share everything that goes on in those meetings with your department head, with your supervisors at the department head level, but you would actually give them as much information that you feel comfortable sharing with them. So that they understand that what is it that we're trying to focus on a day-to-day basis. And then encourage each member to come to meetings with their solutions and not their problems. I mean, I can't tell you how important that is. More often than not, I walk into places and the first thing that folks want to do is dump all their problems on your desk. And then I look at them and I say to them, okay, so what are you going to do? And they look at me like this puzzled look on their face. I said, well, what do you mean by that? I said, well, what I mean is that, I hired you to be the department head. And as a result, I want you to come to me with what this is, define the problem and provide me a solution. We can disagree with the solution, but we can debate it. But at least you put them in a position where they're starting to think beyond just what the problem is. Get them to focus on solutions as opposed to functioning on problems. And that makes them more accountable for their roles. It makes it easier for you to manage your organization when they're coming to you with with solutions as opposed to problems on a daily basis. Next slide. So that wraps up my points. I had 7 or 8 points that I wanted to make with you all this morning. I think we stayed pretty much on time. Jen, how do we do time-wise? We're good with that?
Perfect.
Okay, great. So